Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook Podcast listeners. I'm Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We're talking free agency today, all sorts of other news breaking this last week that shook up the overall NFL marketplace, and we're here to talk about it all. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, it's been an absolutely crazy week since the last time we sat down on the show. Lots of happenings. 3-4 different teams made decisions on what they're going to do at their quarterback position and everything. It's been an absolute crazy few days.
Yeah. So let's start with the first domino to fall. The Aaron Rodgers deal in Green Bay. He decided to stay. That was the piece that everyone was going to wait on. It happened before teams decided on their franchise tags, and he goes back to Green Bay on a 4-year deal. Huge contract, but keeps him there. It keeps the Green Bay Packers at the top of the heap when it comes to competing for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, they're, huge deal as far as, both on the field, implications, because now they remain the, the NFC number one or number two team, depending on how you want to look at it, as far as being in contention for a Super Bowl. It's also a huge deal in terms of, $50 million a year or whatever it ends up, the final numbers end up looking like, but it's going to be just a massive contract that we have never seen in the NFL before.
Well, and it's the guaranteed money that's crazy. It's like above $150 million guaranteed, which is just absurd. It just is. And but nonetheless, they have their situation solved. Devontae Adams was franchised, so their franchise is set and moving forward. Other huge news, probably even bigger news than that, is that the Seattle Seahawks traded their future Hall of Fame quarterback, Russell Wilson, to the Denver Broncos for 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a fifth, and 3 players. Noah Fant was in there, Shelby Harris, Drew Lock. Just a mammoth blockbuster deal that shook the world. I mean, it was just crazy. So now the Seattle Seahawks completely pushed the reset button, and the Denver Broncos solved their quarterback problem and immediately kind of fall into place there in the AFC West to compete for the playoffs there. So tell me about that deal and kind of how it went down and what's the result.
So let's start from the Denver Broncos perspective. This is a team that's got a defense that's Super Bowl ready. They've got some great weapons on the offensive side of the ball. They needed a quarterback, and they've been trying to get by with Drew Lock, who has been bad, and journeyman guys like Teddy Bridgewater, and it wasn't working. And they need that signal caller that can go in and take them to the next level. And they got that. They gave up a lot to get him, but they still believe that they are, that team. And so they're one of 3 teams in the AFC that are instantly in the Super Bowl conversation, along with the Chiefs in division and Buffalo. I mean, those 3 teams are the class of the AFC right now. And
you could even add the Chargers to that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, their defense is still pretty bad. We need to wait to see what free agency and the draft does for them. But yeah, that AFC West is loaded. I mean, you also include the Raiders in that mix. I mean, they
become the league's best division now from the NFC West that had Seattle and LA and Arizona and
San Francisco
in it. It's just crazy. So how about from Seattle's perspective? What was going on there? I thought everything was seemingly settled. The coach was saying the right things. The player was saying the right things in the offseason here. and then boom, it just happened out of nowhere. There was no leaks or anything like that.
Mm-mm.
Also, everyone thought that that Aaron Rodgers was going to be their number 1A focus as far as obtaining a quarterback, and it sounds like they were always after Russell Wilson here, and it was a deal that was put together over weeks, not just in days.
Yeah. So with as far as the Rodgers thing, that massive contract didn't happen overnight. Like, he announced that he was coming back and they had this deal ready and all of that, but that's been happening for a couple of weeks at least. So my guess is that his agent has been quietly telling teams, hey, this is, we're looking at going back, so look elsewhere. But the reports are that Denver has been working with Seattle trying to get a deal worked out for a couple of weeks, and Wilson's been their target. We know that Washington had tried to get Wilson, and the Seahawks had turned him down. But if they had been working for a couple of weeks, Denver and Seattle, most likely what that means is that Wilson was in on this, knew what was going on, kind of directing it, because he had a full no trade clause.
What about that meeting with Jody Allen back in January, Keith, as being a pivot point for the franchise where maybe these decisions were done at that point? Yeah,
it does, because the John Snyder, Pete Carroll met with Jody Allen, the team owner, and the head executives of Vulcan, and they said that they were all like in agreement. They had the future of the franchise planned out and all of these things. And with that, this isn't a deal that was done, because someone gave us a great offer. We had to, this is the type of thing that an owner's got to sign off on. And if everyone was in agreement as the direction of the franchise at that point, it would make sense to believe that this was part of the plan. The Seahawks were in a position this year where they were going to move on from Wilson. It also makes logically, you have to look at it. Wilson's got a full no trade clause. He has to sign off on any deal. And so he got to kind of pick where he wanted to go. And he didn't want,
they were going to be, go ahead.
I would say that he didn't want to go to Washington, which is why that deal never got going, even though Washington was really aggressive. And
apparently they made a pitch. They made an offer that was turned down. Yeah.
Yep. And it was turned down. And then he ends up going to Denver for what sounds like less compensation. But because Wilson gets a say on where that trade is, thanks to his no trade clause, the Seahawks' hands were tied a little bit. So they maybe got a little less than I think a lot of us would have believed that Russell Wilson was worth. But their hands were tied. They were given one team to negotiate. I mean,
I think clearly when you break out the players and you break out the 5th round pick and the 2 firsts and 2 seconds, I mean, it's clearly equivalent to 3 first round picks overall. They just kind of parsed it out and did it differently. And of course, Seattle and Denver agreed to the terms. So that is what it is. The other thing I can points to as well, and I'm sure this probably didn't have anything to do with it, but they knew what the market was going to be for Russell Wilson in next year when he was eligible for an extension, if it came to that it was going to be Patrick Mahomes, Aaron's level, $50 million a year plus. And they had to make that decision, and they chose to move on now and reset their franchise, reset the roster, reset the cap for that team going forward. Surprisingly, for a 70-year-old coach, will be 71 in 2022, to do this move. But it'll be interesting, the strategy moving forward. Here's a team that's been relevant, a very good team, very good roster, one of the winningest franchise in the last 10, 12 years overall, now completely pivots to a rebuild. The question is, how long is it going to take to remake that team?
Well, and it really kind of depends on how much how pivoted did they get into that rebuild? How committed are they to a rebuild versus, trying to continue to win? Because if they go in and they're going to, okay, well, we need a quarterback, let's go get, a guy in the draft. This is not a good draft class for quarterbacks if you didn't already know that. But let's say they make the commitment to one and they're going, no, let's build around that guy right away. Let's try and compete this year behind a rookie quarterback and all of that. This is a organization that's probably going to struggle to stay relevant because the roster has deteriorated over the last few years. If they really want to do it right, they need to be bad for a year. They need to look at what the Patriots did. When Tom Brady left and went to Tampa, and Bill Belichick committed to being bad for a year and went ahead and were bad. I don't want to say they tanked because they didn't, but they were still bad. And they got themselves in a position to get their next quarterback. And then they built their roster at that point. And they were already back in the playoffs. They had one bad year and they're back in the playoffs. And now they've got their rookie quarterback and a roster that they can build around. And that's the path that Seattle needs to take if they want to be back quickly and want to be relevant quickly. If they are not willing and committed to doing that, and they just want to go, let's see if we can, keep it together, maybe put a journeyman quarterback, a Teddy Bridgewater in there and see if we can be competitive. And, they're going to go 7-10 and not be in position to get a quarterback again. And it's going to be this long,
middling road.
Back.
Yes.
Yeah. And so they're in a position
essentially
to do that.
they swapped positions with Denver. Denver's in that same spot, and they went and got their guy. Yeah, very interesting. Further conversations, I'm sure, down the road. The other one was the Carson Wentz trade for a few mid-level picks to the Washington Commanders, who were part of
third, and a conditional third.
Yeah, so really the loser out of all of this movement was Washington, because now they completely settled for now what we would know is to be kind of a failed quarterback in Carson Wentz, who just seems to not be able to put it all together. And there seems to be some dysfunction going on, both with the Philadelphia Eagles and now with the Indianapolis Colts. They jettisoned him after acquiring him last year, just after 1 year. And now Washington has that issue.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand the move myself, but they were desperate to get something solved before the draft so they didn't have to reach.
Well, true, but they're also, this is a move that really doesn't make any sense to me, because you look at what happened in Indy is you've got Frank Reich, who was the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia when Carson Wentz, was MVP and all of that. And he was the guy who went to bat and said, nope, we're going to trade for Carson. We're going to, build around him. I know I know who he is. I know what type of quarterback he is. We're going to do this. And so they made the trade, they brought him over. And after 1 year, he goes, yeah, that was a mistake. We're not going to do that. And they traded him away. That is so telling.
And that's from a roster that's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
They're ready to compete for, a top, say, 5 or 6 team in the AFC.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they're at. They're a quarterback away, a decent quarterback away, and they traded away what they had for the unknown, because the trade market existing in the NFL is not good now. The free agent market, which we're going to get into very shortly, will show is not good, and then the draft class this year is not good. What is Indianapolis' path forward in 2022?
I don't know. They were better with they were better with a 40-year-old Phillip Rivers than they were with Carson Wentz. And I think that is part of what they looked at, and they go, if he's not the guy, we're not better having him than finding another journeyman, because that's all he is. So, and for them, it was more about getting out from underneath that contract, because Wentz's contract is like $26 million this year, 28 the year after, 27 the year after that. That's a huge number for a guy that's just a mediocre player at this point. And so for them to get out from underneath that contract, they could go get a journeyman, a Teddy Bridgewater, not be worse in any way, but still be significantly cheaper. So why wouldn't you go do that? And for them, we don't know. We don't know if Deshaun Watson becomes in play for them, and that's what they're going to go after. Whether they're going to go look at Baker Mayfield,
or Jordan
possibly,
Love,
or Jordan Love, trading for one of these other guys that's out there. For them, or maybe their plan is to take one of these quarterbacks in the draft that they believe is going to be there late in round one, and try and build around them and just know that they're going to be bad this first year, because none of these quarterbacks are ready.
And that's hard with a ready built roster when you're a player away. I would think that maybe they would try to put something together for even a Jimmy Garoppolo or something like that.
That might be the case right there, is that they're going to go get because the 49ers are going to be looking to acquire some of the draft capital that they gave away for Trey Lance, and so if they can trade Garoppolo, get some of that back, and not trade him to a team in the NFC, give him to an AFC team where it won't end up biting them if he goes on and plays well. That would be a good spot for them. So that might be the case as well.
All right, so let's get into free agency. We're going to go through position groups, but I just want to lay this out just a little bit. Let's talk about franchise tags really quick. Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin, Cam Robinson, the offensive tackle, Dalton Schultz, the tight end, Orlando Brown, Jesse Bates, the free safety, David Njoku, and Mike Gesicki, tight end. Those players received the franchise tag, now out of the free agency market. Not tagged players include Harold Landry, J.C. Jackson, Teron Armstead, and others, Chandler Jones. So there are some big names out there in a couple of position groups. But overall, I think we'll show today that free agency overall is going to be somewhat of a downer for a lot of teams, just because there's just not a lot of rich talent out there. There might be some depth pieces for some for some teams, but teams are going to have a hard time filling out their roster with this list of players, and we'll talk about that. There are a few teams with salary cap space available. The Colts at 69, almost 70,000 or 70 million, excuse me, are at the top of that list. Dolphins, Seahawks, Jets, Jaguars all have right around 40 million or more, and a whole host of teams that are hovering around 30 to 25 million as well. So there are teams that have some room, but we'll take a look at the market. Why don't we start with the quarterbacks? Since we've just had that conversation, let's talk about what's available in free agency, and as if there's any of these guys that any team that we've just talked about, the Seahawks, Indianapolis for sure, and a few others that need quarterback help, like the Panthers, for example. What are they going to do? I mean, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, Marcus Mariota, Andy Dalton, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Michael Trubisky, Jacob Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, Geno Smith. It's not good.
Josh Rosen, Jeff Driscoll,
McCoy.
Nick Mullins,
right.
AJ McCarron. I mean, find me a starting quarterback there. The only
that you're confident with.
The only one out of this entire group that you're going to look at as a guy that can go win you some games is Teddy Bridgewater, and we know that this is a guy that's will be on his fourth team for a reason. He's a journeyman. He's a guy that's going to go.
He just came from the team that went out and got Russell Wilson. So I mean, there you go.
Yeah, he wasn't the guy that was going to take them. But he did some nice things for them. But ultimately, he's not a guy that's going to go win you a Super Bowl. I mean, I think that's fairly clear. He's a nice placeholder. He's a guy that'll be a bridge quarterback for you. But he's not a guy that's going to, get you in contention. And he's the best of the group.
Yeah, I would take a chance maybe on Marcus Mariota for some upside there. Obviously the Titans got rid of him, and now he's being left alone off the Raiders roster to enter free agency. I think he's got some ability there with an upside that he could be a marginal starter for you, and then a high-end backup, obviously. But he's somebody that's still only 28 years old that you might take a shot on. If you're going to just focus on bridging and winning, having a placeholder, a guy like Andy Dalton or Trubisky or Tyrod Taylor, Geno Smith, maybe even had 3 or 4 games in Seattle last year that he started when Russell Wilson was out, and showed that he's capable of being a game manager guy, but not a guy that could win you games specifically. He had moments, but that was about it.
The guy that I believe will get more attention and have more interest than I think most people are anticipating is going to be Mitchell Trubisky. Yeah. I mean, he was the 2nd overall pick in the draft. He was not good in Chicago. We all know that, but there is upside there. There were moments when he was in Chicago where he actually looked like he could be the guy. And then he wasn't. And after spending a year in Buffalo behind Josh Allen, getting a chance to, just clear his head and get away from what was the disaster in Chicago, he's now going to be available, and he's only 28, and he's a guy that has starting experience and has some success. And if you're looking for a guy that's going to be a bridge for 1 or 2 years, he might be your guy. And he'll get more interest than I think most people would suspect. But given his track record, like that, that's why his track record is not good. Let's just go with that.
All right. So let's move on. Obviously we've mentioned the quarterback market for a while on the show as being bad, and that's why. So why don't you take me through the position groups on the offense as you want to kind of move through, and we'll talk about this as you go.
Yeah, so if we want to, let's just go through some of the weapons. Let's start at running back, where the market is the running back market is never good. Running backs have a very short shelf life in the NFL. Most of them do not perform well on their second contract because they've just taken too much of a beating during their rookie contract, and by the time they get to that second one, even if they've earned themselves a big contract, they end up not living up to it. You've got some guys that will be, somewhat interesting. Leonard Fournette, who's only 27, Melvin Gordon, who's 29, but hasn't had a lot of, wear and tear. Rashad Penny, who was a 1st-round pick in Seattle a couple of years ago, only 26, but he's barely played in the NFL because of nagging injuries. But then during the last 6 weeks of this year, suddenly looked like the guy Seattle thought they were drafting.
Right.
So
Right.
He'll be interesting to watch. And then maybe a guy like Phillip Lindsay, who was really good as an undrafted rookie, and then since then has not done much of anything because of injury and stuff. He might garner some interest because someone will look to recapture that. Maybe Ronald Jones II out of Tampa, who's only 25, but has definitely fallen out of favor with that coaching staff, and kind of got lost on the bench despite being a guy that looked really promising as a younger player. So, there's some interesting things there, but it's not a great group.
I'll give you a couple other names too. Cordero Patterson is interesting to me, not as a runner per se, but more as a weapon, a guy that you can line up. Yeah. As a running back, as a wide receiver, as just a guy that's going to be, a fly sweep kind of guy. James Conner, most recently with the Arizona Cardinals, previously with the Pittsburgh Steelers, showed that he's still got a little something. I thought that he performed well at times in Arizona. Still young at 27, could be a power back in a rotation type of a deal. Chase Edmonds, again, from the Cardinals, is a change of pace kind of a guy I like. Sony Michel, I thought looked decent at times for the Rams when Cam Akers was out all year. Rashad Penny is interesting. He's probably the most interesting name on this entire list because he really flashed. I mean, he just didn't He performed pretty well. He performed at the highest level in the NFL for 5 straight weeks, which was kind of crazy out of just absolutely doing nothing for 3.5 years. And his injury history is a huge concern. It's such a huge concern. I'm not sure Seattle brings him back for a certain amount. I think if the market is lukewarm for him, he could return to Seattle on a 1-year deal. There may be a team that has extra money in free agency and decides they want to flip a 2 or 3 year contract at Rashad Penny above, $3 or $4 or $5 million a year, and he would probably take that, and Seattle probably would not offer that.
No, not at all.
So that might be an interesting name to watch.
The thing is, it's a huge risk if you're a team, because you're taking on a guy that he's got a 5-game stretch where he looked like one of the best backs in the NFL, but he's also got a 3.5 year stretch where he never played because he was never healthy, and
there was never any consistency, and you had him on your roster, so he was taking up a spot, but he really wasn't doing anything for you. It's tough. It's a tough deal. I would personally do something that's safer, that you have a guarantee guy that's going to come in and take reps for you. Would be a guy like Raheem Mostert, who fits that same sort of style in an outside zone kind of a scheme guy that's got really nice speed.
He hasn't played in 2 years.
Yeah, it's tough.
So, I mean, you talk about a guy, if you're looking at
he had 4 snaps in 2021, but he did have 237 in 2020 with a great grade. And then 2019 had a full season. So,
yeah.
I agree, though. I agree.
He hasn't played in forever, and his style of running and the fact that he's had 2 major injuries in 2 years, he's an even bigger risk than Rashad Penny in my eyes. But yeah, he's another guy that's there. He's younger. He's a name, and people will look at him. And he's a guy that's probably going to sign for next to nothing. And if he stays healthy, you could have a really nice player on your roster.
And there are several options in the draft too for teams that want to go younger and with a lot of upside. Usually a combination of both. Yep. The wide receiver market in free agency is interesting.
It's surprisingly good, actually.
Yeah, I think I
actually kind of like this.
Yeah, the first 2 players that were initially available were franchise and Devontae Adams and Chris Godwin. Godwin's more of a slot guy anyway. Mike Williams re-signed with the Chargers on a deal, $60 million deal. So he's off the market as well. But Allen Robinson's there, Odell Beckham, Michael Gallup, Antonio Brown, Juju Schuster, Smith Schuster. Christian Kirk is an interesting name for a team that might need some upside there with some speed and over-the-top ability, as well as out of the slot. DJ Shark, Will Fuller, Jamison Crowder, Marquise Valdez Scantling. So there are some names. There's some interesting upside players. Those are all really good players that would be most of those guys are second and third options in an offense. But there's if you're looking for that on your team, you're going to have some choices there.
Yeah, it's actually not, like I said, it's not a bad year to need a wide receiver because there are guys, and usually there's not this level of talent.
This is going to be a depressed market for me, I think, too, because of the upside in the draft. I mean, we just saw the draft. There were like I'm going to say close to 20 players that ran a 4.4 and under in that draft. At the combine.
It's a really fast wide receiver class in the draft. And for fast guys, there's a lot of polish in their route running and stuff. The one guy here that I think is going to break the bank is going to be Juju Smith-Schuster, because if we saw with him in he only played 19% of the snaps not last year because of an injury, but what we saw before that is a guy that's a true number one, and I think he's going to get a huge deal. My guess is that he gets that huge deal in Pittsburgh and he ends up staying.
And he's only 25 years old.
Exactly. So, but that is he's a guy that That's a huge name, and it's there. And if somebody wants to go make a play at him, I mean, the free agency period is about to start. So if a team wants to go get that guy, to go get that weapon that they feel they need, man, he's sitting right there for you.
And we all know the Pittsburgh offense struggled in the last couple of years, and so his potential might be untapped.
Oh yeah, because I mean he had Roethlisberger throwing to him, which 10 years ago was a great thing, but last year was an awful thing. I mean, he was not a good player. And
the other player I think is undervalued a little bit, maybe not, is Allen Robinson from Chicago. We all know that Chicago had difficulty throwing the ball in the last few years, and Allen Robinson's kind of transcended that even to be their number one option. And I think that for a team looking for a number one option, he's kind of the guy that's sitting out there that would fill that role. How about tight ends before we move on to the offensive line? Any interest in the tight end market?
So the tight end market, I mean, Zach Ertz is going to be, the guy that's going to garner a lot of interest. He's
even
been
at
a good
his
player
age. I thought he was kind of declining a little bit.
Kind of, but he's 32, and yeah, he's had some injuries and all that. But a lot of his decline this last year was that he changed teams mid-year and didn't know the offense and had to figure all that stuff out. I still think he's going to garner a lot of interest. Jimmy Graham and is out there, but he is a shell of the player he once was. Gronkowski is available technically, but my guess is he'll retire again because he only came out of retirement to play with Brady, and now Brady's gone. And then you start going down the look, and you go, okay, Gerald Everett, who was in Seattle, had a great year.
He has some upside for a receiving type tight end.
Yeah, I mean, he had a great year in Seattle. He's only going to be 28, and so he's a guy that if you're looking for a weapon, he's an interesting name and someone to keep an eye on. Max Williams from Arizona is another name. If you're looking for a more complete tight end that does more than just, catch the ball, can also block and do the other things that you're asking, but he's got a nice
skill set.
He does.
He does have a nice skill set, but he's just, he's a middling tight end. He's a number 2 tight end on your offense.
Yeah. But if you're looking for a guy that can do that, it's like, hey, you've got your number one, and you need a guy that can come in and kind of do everything. He's a guy that will generate some interest. And that's kind of it. I mean, there's a lot of other names, but not a lot of guys that are going to come in and really make a difference for you.
Yeah, Rob Gronkowski is there, but I don't even know if he's going to play for anybody other than Tampa Bay or play at all this year. Njoku and Schultz and Gesicki all franchised, which is surprising that you'd have so many guys franchised. Evan Ingram is out there at age 28. He might be kind of a big receiving tight end that would get some action, but not a tremendous amount of skill. I don't know. That's it, really. I mean, Mo Alley Cox is a guy that's about 29 that has a little bit of an all-around game to him.
OJ Howard,
same sort of kind of feel. Yeah. Jared Cook, older guy, 35. If he's going to continue to play, he could be a placeholder kind of guy for you, but you're going to overspend for that. So I wouldn't invest in that myself, but especially when you can go out and get a guy like that in the NFL draft. All right, let's move to the offensive line, Keith. One of the things that you like.
Yeah. So let's start with the tackles, because there's actually some decent ones out here. You've got Trent Brown with the Patriots. He's their right tackle. He's 29. He's available. And Dwayne Brown coming from Seattle. He's 37. Coming off a kind of down year, and at that age, you're like, oh, if he's on a down year, but at the same time, he played almost the entire season without injury and still played at a high level. He's just no longer the perennial Pro Bowler he once was. But you could get
what kind of a contract do you think that Dwayne Brown's going to fetch on the open market?
I would say probably a 2-year, like $22 million deal. So it's not going to be like the massive, deal that you're going to see. A guy get for being a starting left tackle, but it's also not going to be like you're not going to get him cheap, and so that's the other part of it. So
Yeah, Tyrone Armstead's probably the premier guy
Yep.
out there available. Previously with New Orleans, high end starting left tackle for a team. So anybody that's got cash and needs a premier left tackle, they could be in the market for him. He is 30 years old. Will be 31 this next season. So you're going to have a shorter term investment here, but he's still going to command, $18 million a year for the next 3 years for you. But it's going to give your team. Here's a player that would be a good fit for a team that's one piece away, and they need an anchor on that at that left tackle spot. Now, if you're an up and coming team or you're lousy, you're not great, it's probably not the player you're going to invest a ton of money in, I wouldn't think.
Yeah. If you're one of those teams that's in the middle of a rebuild, I mean, that's a lot of money to sink on a player that may not still be playing at that really high level when you're ready to compete.
Yeah,
so
I would throw money more at like a Morgan Moses, maybe from the New York Jets, where you could throw, say, $8, $9, $10 million at, and get 90% of the production, not 90, but 85% of the production from Armstead, and still be fairly decent. And a guy that's really hadn't had any injury history. So,
yeah. And then, there's some other guys on here in this list that are more names than they are
Eric Fisher,
Riley Reef. Those are the two that kind
right.
of, because their names, because they once had, draft status and that kind of stuff, but have never really kind of lived up for it. Eric Fisher's not a bad player, but he's not a great player.
How about two failed? Do I want to say failed? Yeah, I want to say failed. Two failed kind of right tackle options. How about Brandon Shell and Jermaine Ifedi out there on the market? Is there a market for guys that have played on multiple teams that have done just complete marginal play? In fact, I think Jermaine Ifedi leads the league in offensive penalties since he came into the league.
Yeah,
back in 2000, whatever.
And it's not been for him. It's not been he leads it in penalties, but it's because he's played for a long time. For him, he's led or been in the top 3 in offensive penalties every single year he's been in the league. So
yeah,
I don't know.
And that only happens from a lack of athleticism because you have to reach.
Yeah, you're just reaching, you're holding, you're leaning,
bad technique, etc.
Yeah, he's a guy that there will be a market because
I'm shocked.
His tape as a run blocker is good, and teams are going to say, "Hey, we can move him inside to guard."
Yeah,
and he'll
been saying that.
There. The Bears tried to do that. He ended up back at tackle because guys got hurt and they moved him out there, and then of course he bombed out and was bad. So. There's that option. A guy like Shell, who came up with the Jets, he's been okay and he's been steady and he's never been good. I could see there being a market for him. He's a little older now, so that market may be smaller, but he's a guy that you would bring in not as a starter, but as a swing tackle, a guy that you would have as on your backup that you believe could play both sides, and he's your bench player. He's your tackle that you have available in case someone gets hurt. And
but his health is even in question. The one thing he doesn't do is he's not a penalty machine. So
no,
he does offer you steady average play. Is basically what you're going to get with Brandon Shell. So you're not going to have to overpay for a guy like that, which is the nice thing. There is a market for a player like Brandon Shell where you're going to pay a tackle $6 million. That's where he's at. He's kind of in that band, in that range where you can get a guy for a couple of years to be your right tackle while you're looking for your right tackle of the future, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So if you can go get, if you're looking for that player and you're okay with the guy that's, had a few injuries because you're expecting him not to play and so therefore not have an opportunity to get hurt for most of the year, why wouldn't you go take your chance on Jason Spriggs instead? Because he's got more athletic upside.
Yeah,
he
go ahead.
is a guy. I would say he's a guy that I think still looks like he can develop into a better player than what we've seen.
Okay, I'm going to give you a name.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, here's the player that I would choose. If I had any player that we've talked about on this list so far, is Joseph Boom, the tackle from the Los Angeles Rams. He's 27 years old. He fits in a certain scheme. He's a little undersized, but he's possibly a starting left tackle. He came in for Whitworth and did an admirable job. I think three games this last year. And he's got a little bit of an upside to him. You could throw out a 1-year prove-it deal. You could have him be in the rotation or start for you in a pinch or whatever. And I think that he might provide a little bit of upside for a team. And quite frankly, when you're looking for guys like that, upside is really all you can hope for. And a guy like that at that age would be a guy that I would have my eye on.
Yeah, at 27, he played pretty well. I mean, you're looking at he is the guy you would sign to be your swing tackle, and compete, especially if you've got like a young player. You've got someone that you drafted a year ago so he was a rookie. He was developing on the sidelines and in practice. Perfect. And the expectation is that they're coming in to be the starter this year. You don't want to just walk in with that and nothing else. You need someone for them to compete with, someone to push them, and someone to take over if that player doesn't live up to your expectations. And a guy like Noblin would be perfect for that.
Yeah. Now, the one player I did find extremely interesting that was franchise was Cam Robinson, because for me, Cam Robinson is just a middling guy in this league at the tackle position, but he's young and he's just a low end starting tackle for me. He's nothing special, but Jacksonville went ahead and franchised him, which is going to cost them like $15 million a year or whatever, maybe even more. I can't remember what the franchise tag is for the tackle. But that seems like a pretty rich deal for Cam Robinson. I don't know. I don't see it, but
yeah, I mean, he's young enough, and you don't get better by letting good young players walk. And I think it's a situation where they have a lot of salary cap room and flexibility. And they're like, you know what we can do is we can go ahead and franchise him, maybe try and extend him beyond that. And then it's just one less position that they have to find before they're ready to be competitive. Even if he's not a great player, he's still a player. He's still a starter, and they just need so much that I think it works for them to go ahead and make sure they get to keep him.
So let's look at the centers and guards, and then what I'm going to do, Keith, is I'm going to split this show in half eventually. And I think that's a great idea. Focus on the defensive side of the ball, so we can take our time. We don't have to rush through it. So let's talk about what's available in the guard market. Brandon Scherf seems like he's the guy at the top. He's still youngish for that position at 30 years old. Washington Football Club now throwing money at Carson Wentz. Are they going to want to keep this guy to help protect, or are they going to and bring him back, or are they just going to walk away? And he's one of the best all-around guards in football when he's healthy. The question for him has always been, snap count and so forth. The last 3 years, he's been doing pretty good. He was dinged up in 2019 and a little bit this last year, but he's always graded well in the top 10 in that position group. And he's probably the biggest name. There's a few others as well.
Yeah, I mean, he is the biggest name. And then, you go down from there, and there's, Rodgers, Saffold, and so, but he's 34 and is probably a guy that teams are going to start looking at because he's declining, and they go, well, is he going to be willing to play for what we think he's worth? And so he may find a limited market. And it's not a great year for guards. Laken Tomlinson from the 49ers is he's 30 years old.
Average. He's above average.
He's a guy that it depends on your scheme. If you want to run and run straight ahead, he's a guy that can have a lot of value to you. One of the problems that he had in San Francisco is that he doesn't have that lateral movement, and they run a lot of outside zone. He's just not a good scheme fit for them, and which is why I think he is free to walk and go wherever he wants.
Yeah.
But and there are teams that will look at him and kind of covet his skill set because they don't run that outside zone. They run more of a straight ahead man blocking scheme, and he'll be much better at that.
What do you think of Connor Williams out of Dallas as being kind of that zone heavy scheme guard that's able to be athletic at 25 years old?
Yeah. He's got some technique issues that I'd want to, like, if I was them, I would make sure that I met with him and make sure that they felt he was coachable and willing to make some changes, because he should be better than he is.
And he's not as long. He's not. Yeah. He's just not as long as some players you would want to have there. So he does have issues with facing players with length, I think.
Mm-hmm. So there's that. I mean, and then there's it's not a great list. It just really isn't for guards. It
gets pretty weak pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking down this list quite a ways, and I'm like not finding a lot.
How about centers?
So centers is always kind of a weak market because there's just so few of them that are starting caliber players just in the NFL period. I mean, you have a guy like Ryan Jensen from the Bucks, but he made $10 million last year. That's a lot for a center, and he's gonna ask for that kind of money again.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Matt Paradis from the Panthers, similar thing, but he only played 50% of the snaps last year. He's 33. Ben Jones of the Titans, also 33.
Looking for a decent contract too at that age.
Yeah, so you've got guys that there's talent, but they're getting a little long in the tooth. And probably the best combination of skill and age would be Billy Price coming from the Giants, and he is not a guy that's going to be thought of as a Pro Bowler. So it is if you need a center, there are ones available.
Well, how about like Brian Allen and Matt Paradis and Mason Cole and Ethan Posick's out there. That's about it. But those are younger guys that may fill roles depending on what teams are looking for scheme fit wise.
Yeah. I would be very interested in Nick Martin, who was with the Raiders last year, previously with Dallas, I believe, who looked really good early on, but last year only played a couple of snaps and, has had some injury problems, but looked good earlier in his career. I'd be curious to see where he's at physically in terms of his medicals and whether or not you could bring him in with the expectation of him playing and doing well, because if he's getting healthy and can stay healthy, he was a good player.
All right, well, let's wrap this segment up and we'll come back and do the other one. So you can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at Alvstad NFL. Find the show on your favorite podcast app and YouTube channel. Need subscribers, help us out, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.